Hello horse racing fans, and I'm making the mother of all omelets. I'm finally covering a topic that I've never seen anyone else make in video form. Talking about horses that people consider overrated. More specifically, in a list form. I mean, the closest thing we got was this video from over 12 years ago, and that's it. So I decided why not make my own video on the topic, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and honestly, I want to generate some discussion. I want to get people talking. In some ways, I want you to disagree with me. So here it is. The top 5 most overrated racehorses, in my opinion. Now before I start, I want to preface this by saying that overrated does not mean I think these horses are completely untalented or bad. The way the rankings will work is the more different my opinion on the horse is in comparison to the general public, the higher they will be on the list. I think that's simple enough to follow, and I'll preface this a million times over, but this is my opinion and my opinion alone. You are allowed to disagree with me and rank these horses however you like. So with all that said, let's get into it. Bayern. Now my opinion on Bayern isn't too different from the general public, but I had to make this a top 5 somehow, and I had 3 main horses that I knew would highlight most of the list. But you still had 2 slots left, so Bayern makes it in. At his best, he was definitely freakishly good, defeating California Chrome twice as well as Shared Belief. But between those great performances, he was just so inconsistent. He had one trick, and it was go to the front and never look back. That was all he really had to offer, and if things didn't go perfectly his way, then he wasn't going to do his best. He was a good example of, if everything goes right, nothing stops this horse. But if anything interrupts that, then he's done for. In between winning such major races as the Haskell Invitational, the Pennsylvania Derby in record time, and the Breeders' Cup Classic, he was dead last in the Travers Stakes, second to last in the Preakness, and then as a 4-year-old, don't even get me started. Last in both the Churchill Downs Stakes and the Metropolitan Mile. It's hard for me to really appreciate any of his big achievements. He was the textbook definition of all or nothing, and I don't think that deserves lots of praise. But most people are generally aware of this, and I don't see Bayern being discussed as one of the top 10 best horses of the 21st century or anything. I just have a slightly more negative opinion of him than most people, and I needed to pad out the list to get to the real good ones that I really genuinely believe are overrated. So with that, he makes it on. Arrogate. Similarly to Bayern, he's a Bob Baffert horse that had some really good runs and some really abysmal ones, and is sometimes regarded a bit higher than he should. He outdoes Bayern though because he's frequently in discussions for a top horse of the 21st century, sometimes as high as being considered one of the top 3 best. I mean, in the Dubai World Cup, his greatest race and honestly one of the most impressive races in the last 20 years, he was dubbed the Man of War of the 21st century. And that didn't really age so well, or maybe it did, you'll find out later in the video. Because his next 3 races were they were awful. He went from overcoming incredible amounts of trouble, going from last to first, a strategy that he wasn't used to, and still winning the race in style against Gunrunner, who went on to earn $17 million, to a horse who couldn't win a Grade 2 at Del Mar with just 4 other opponents. His last 3 races were just so bad that they dragged him down just so significantly. When we talk about the greatest horses of all time, every once in a while they do have a bad race, sometimes an infamous race that they've lost. However, it never gets to this point. And also, most of the all-time greats have run more than Arrogate, so it's not as big a deal if they have one bad race. But for a horse like Arrogate, who only raced 11 times, every race counts. So to end his career with 3 very bad races with no real discernible excuses other than he just wasn't the same horse that he was in Dubai, I think that's a bit too much for me, especially if we're talking about greatest of anything here. And I do perfectly understand why some people put him towards the top of their lists. I just find Arrogate slightly below that threshold, and so he squeaks in at number 4. But after this, things get a bit more drastic. Zenyatta. Okay, so hang on a second. I do personally believe Zenyatta is one of the top 5 best fillies of all time, and some of her races were downright amazing, and her winning streak is probably one of the greatest in American history, maybe even the greatest. But to say that she is the greatest racehorse of all time, like plenty of people love to say, I think that's a stretch. Her winning streak is still absolutely impressive, but if you look into it a little deeper, you have to notice quite a few things, such as, for example, 17 of her 20 career starts were on synthetic poly track, a surface that is not dirt. The reason why I bring this up is because one of her biggest moments in her career, winning the 2009 Breeders' Cup Classic, was most definitely benefited from running on the synthetic. Every horse who won a Breeders' Cup during the synthetic years either was a turf horse or was a horse that had already had experience on it. No other year would you have turf horses like Gio Ponti and Twice Over beat Summer Bird, the champion 3-year-old of 2009. The other big thing is that she definitely did a bit of competition dodging. She could have run in races like the Santa Anita Handicap, the Hollywood Gold Cup, or even the Pacific Classic. But instead, they decided just to run in lukewarm Grade 1 synthetic races at Hollywood Park and Santa Anita to preserve the streak, beating horses like Tough Tiz Sizz, Santa Teresita, Romance's Diane. Notice how most of these names aren't ones you remember for being good. And it's not like she didn't beat tough horses on the dirt, she beat Ginger Punch, who was a great filly. And in that faithful 2010 Breeders' Cup Classic, she beat the best horses on dirt, such as Lookin' at Lucky, only losing to Blame by a head. And ironically, that race did a lot better for her reputation than almost every other race she had ran before it. She overcame insane amounts of trouble, and only was a head away from becoming the second horse ever to win the Breeders' Cup Classic twice, behind Tiz Now. That's freakishly impressive, but it's a minority. A lot of her races were basically just handed to her because they were synthetic and they were against weak fields. And it's not like she didn't have the potential to win races like the Pacific Classic or the Santa Anita Handicap, it's just that her owners dodged a lot of those races and thus will never truly know her full potential. And that is undoubtedly frustrating to me because the few times she ran against some of the toughest horses on dirt, she really held her own and did a great job. But unfortunately, that was a rarity. And to be the greatest of all time, you have to beat the greatest. And she didn't. Man o' War. Now that little quip comes together. But that's not really important. Right now, I have to explain myself because I am declaring what some people consider the greatest racehorse of all time overrated. And I'll tell you why. And it's partially not his fault, but more of just the time he was in. Man o' War raced over 100 years ago, and that means that we don't have certain luxuries when it comes to him, such as full race replays and crop size. What I mean by this is that there is on average 20,000 thoroughbred foals born each year. When Man o' War raced, that number wasn't even close. I don't know the exact number, but it probably wasn't over 2,000. In short, not nearly as many horses were born back in those days. In general, Man o' War is simply an orange, while modern racing is more like an apple. He was a great horse in his era, but because of how long ago he raced, he just doesn't really compare anymore. Now, is it true that he set tons upon tons of records in his day? Yes, but most didn't last very long. The record that Man o' War held onto the longest was the mile and 5/8 world record, and even that was broken by the mighty Swabs just 30 years later, and is still not broken. Or even his main rival, Secretariat, whose records still stand today nearly 50 years after his last race. If you compare Secretariat and Man o' War, yes, Man o' War has the better record to Secretariat, but in every other way, Secretariat's race record aged significantly better than Man o' War's. Simply put, under a modern lens, Man o' War's record just doesn't stand the test of time. And because of that, it makes it a little more baffling that he is considered the greatest racehorse of all time, when it's mostly just mythos. You know the story where he won a race by 100 lengths? That was a match race against a horse that was entered at the very last minute just to make it not a walkover. In short, beat nobody. Which is a pretty general sentiment for his career. A lot of the races that he ran in the latter half of his career were against 1 to 2 horses, and they were basically just paid walkovers. Yeah, he carried a lot of weight, but it's pretty easy to win races when only 1 or 2 horses show up. And it's made even more confusing when other horses before and after his era did very similar things to Man o' War, but are yet not held in such high regard. Sinzabi won 14 of 15 races in the early 1900s. In the late 1900s, Colin went undefeated in 15 starts. And Native Dancer had a near identical record to Man o' War, except he won 1 more race, 21 for 22. And yet Native Dancer is usually in the top 5, while Man o' War is pitted as number 1. If you remove the nostalgia glasses of Man o' War, I just don't see it. But yet, there is still one horse that I considered even more overhyped than Man o' War, which is kinda crazy. But before that, I'm gonna go over some honorable mentions. Winx. A lot of people like to call Winx overrated because she never went outside of Australia like Black Caviar did. While I agree that definitely was a bit of snub potential right there, but the fact that she made the country of Australia, a racing country that is known for some pretty legitimate horse racing, look so easy while also setting records that affect the entire horse racing world, such as having the most amount of Grade 1 wins by any horse in history. Yeah, I can't call her overrated. Yes, there is some missed potential, but that's the case in almost every single racehorse. She won 33 consecutive races at the highest level in her country. I can't be mad at that. California Chrome. This is another horse that a lot of people are very happy to call overrated, and I can partially see why. When you have a fan base as rabid as California Chrome's, it's very easy to give a horse more credit than they deserve. I mean, that's partially why Zenyatta made it onto this list, because her fan base sometimes tries hyping her up as one of the greatest of all time, when at best she's one of the greatest race mares of all time. And Chrome is somewhat of a victim of this to a certain extent, and at the same time, the 2014 Kentucky Derby was one of the weakest Kentucky Derby fields in recent memory, but it's all the stuff he did after the Triple Crown that gets him off this list, because he did a lot of things you're probably not going to see from a mainstream racehorse in a very long time. In the same season where he won the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, he became a Grade 1 winner on the turf, and in Dubai, he won carrying 132 pounds, and in today's modern racing era, horses winning under heavy weight isn't really something you see very often. I mean, the most recent example besides California Chrome was Curlin in 2008, and before that, it was Skip Away in 1998. He is more than just a Triple Crown near miss handled by an overzealous owner with rabid fans that hype him up more than he should. He did a lot of things that are certainly a rarity in today's modern racing climate, and for that he has my utmost respect and does not get on the list. But with those two now off the list, it's time to talk about the horse who makes it to number 1 on the list. Here is what I think is the number 1 most overrated racehorse. Ruffian. Yep, there's no joke here. I think Ruffian is the most overrated racehorse of all time. Is it true that she set stakes records in all 9 of her stakes races from distances of 5.5 furlongs to 1.5 miles? Yes. Is it true she led every single pole of every single race she ran in? Yes. And is it true that in her 10 career starts, her average winning margin was 8 1/3 lengths? Yes. Is that impressive? Yes. Does that make her the greatest racehorse of all time, better than even Secretariat? Good lord, no. I get it. She's fast. But that's not all you need to be a great racehorse, let alone the greatest of all time. She faced absolutely no trouble in any of her career races. And more importantly, name one good horse that Ruffian beat. And no, Foolish Pleasure doesn't count because that race didn't finish. There is no way to prove that Ruffian would have stayed in front of Foolish Pleasure for the remaining 3/4 of a mile of that race. That race is just forever going to be a mystery. But if I had to say which horse I thought was objectively better, Foolish Pleasure was way better than Ruffian because he actually faced against legitimately tough horses. Foolish Pleasure ran and even beat the likes of Forgo, a 3-time Horse of the Year recipient and a Hall of Famer, as well as finishing no worse than second in all 3 jewels of the Triple Crown. That takes guts. But who did Ruffian beat in her 10 races? The short answer is, not much. The long answer, well, I decided to dig into it and find out who did she actually race against. Out of the 10 races that she did complete, only 5 horses in those fields had major graded stakes races to their credit throughout any point in their career. Laughing Bridge, winner of the Grade 2 Schuylerville and Adirondack Stakes, only won 5 of 15 starts. Han Nasty, dual Grade 2 winner, and winner of 9 total races in 26 starts. Aunt Jin, dual Grade 1 winner, won 8 of 17 career starts. Let Me Linger, Grade 1 winner, won 7 of 41 starts. And lastly, Sun and Snow, winner of the Kentucky Oaks, 7 career wins from 46 starts. That is it. That is the best I could find. Notice that these are horses that we don't very well remember, and also notice that most of these horses only had 1 or 2 Grade Stakes victories to their name. So what does this all mean? It means that she was basically spoon-fed all her wins. Had everything go her way, beat a bunch of mediocre horses, and also set a stakes record while she was at it. Does this really sound like the horse that quote-unquote might be better than Secretariat? I don't think so. While all her stakes records are certainly impressive, none of them stand as world records today, when great horses like Swaps and Secretariat have world records that have lasted over half a century. And more importantly, most of the great horses have at least one great horse that made them better. Secretariat had Sham and also be Hall of Famers Forgo, Cougar 2, and Riva Ridge. Swaps had Nashua, Dr.Fager had Damascus, Kelso had Gumbo, and Ruffian had nobody. She was just a fast horse who took advantage of a very weak generation of 3-year-old fillies. And again, like Zenyatta, I wouldn't mind it if she was just an argument for the greatest race mare of all time. That you can have some legitimate argument for. But as with most horses that have tragic ends to their story, the what could have been factor kinda spirals out of control. Everyone wonders what could have happened if Ruffian didn't run in that match race and had a longer career. What if she ran against the boys in the Travers Stakes instead? Well, if we're talking about that race specifically, there was no way she was beating Wanjima. I mean, just look at him. But in general, that what could have been factor definitely has a million possibilities. Personally, I'm on the more cynical side. I think that like horses such as Meadowstar and Songbird, her undefeated status would have been taken away from her some way or another, and she wouldn't have been as remembered as she is now. But who knows? Maybe if she did have a longer career, she could have proved me wrong. But for now, we just have our first 10 races to go off of, and those first 10 races, while they were very flashy and visually pleasing, they were against nobody, and that doesn't deserve to be praised as the greatest of all time. To be the greatest, you gotta beat the greatest, and that's not what she did. And that concludes this list. I hope you guys were still able to enjoy it, even if it is a bit controversial, and if you want, you can comment down your own list of horses you consider overrated. And at some point in the future, I will make a video about the most underrated racehorses, which will hopefully be a more positive topic. And if you want, you can comment down your personal favorite underrated racehorses, because I'll need all the help I can get. Even with that video being a top 10 instead of a top 5, an underrated racehorse video is a lot more vast, because there are so many more horses that are underappreciated than overappreciated. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed this video and aren't too mad at me, and see you guys next time.